Imagine your home, the place where you should feel safest, turning into a landscape of nightmares. The walls, once familiar, now seem to close in, harboring secrets that whisper in the dark. What if those whispers were real? Join us as we delve into 10 terrifying true stories that will make you reconsider every shadow and every sound in the place you call home. It was a night like any other, or at least it should have been. The kind of night where you settle in, cozy and comfortable, the day's worries melting away as you lose yourself in the quiet solitude of your home. I was alone in my parents' house, an idyllic, secluded place nestled by a serene pond. During the day, it was a paradise of peace, but at night the isolation took on a different tone, one that I would soon come to dread. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the darkness outside was complete, an inky black that swallowed everything beyond the reach of the house lights. I was in the sunroom, the only light coming from the muted glow of the TV. The show playing was one I had seen 100 times before, something comforting to fill the silence. But that night, even the familiar voices on the screen couldn't soothe the unease that had begun to creep into my mind. It started as a faint sound, so soft that I almost didn't hear it. A gentle tapping, as if someone, or something, was lightly drumming their fingers against the glass. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind catching a branch outside. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more insistent, until it was impossible to ignore. I muted the TV, the silence that followed almost deafening. The tapping continued, coming from somewhere near the pond just beyond the yard. My heart began to race, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead as I strained to hear. The sound was rhythmic, but irregular, as if someone was out there trying to get my attention. Every rational thought in my mind told me to stay put, to ignore it and wait for it to stop. But curiosity and a growing sense of unease pushed me to the window. The night outside was impenetrable, the pond invisible under the shroud of darkness. I flicked on the deck lights, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. But the yard remained empty. The tapping stopped the moment the lights came on, leaving me in a silence so profound it felt like the world had paused. I stood there for what felt like hours, my eyes scanning the yard for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. No animals, no shadows, no sign that anything had been there at all. The only sound was the rapid pounding of my own heart, echoing in my ears. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly backed away from the window, a sudden urge to lock every door and window in the house overwhelming me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just out of sight. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sent a jolt of terror through me. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that there was nothing out there, but the fear clung to me like a shadow, growing stronger with each passing hour. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to like this video and share it with your friends who love a good scare. Morning came, but with it, no relief. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind, a loop of terror that I couldn't escape. The fear had burrowed deep into my psyche, wrapping itself around my thoughts like a vice. The sunroom, once my favorite place in the house, now felt like a trap, a place where something had been waiting, watching me from the darkness. I tried to go about my day as usual, but the unease followed me, a constant presence that whispered doubts and fears into my ear. Every corner of the house seemed darker, every shadow more menacing. I avoided the sunroom, not wanting to face the memories of the night before, but the fear followed me wherever I went. As the day wore on, the sense of dread only grew stronger. It was as if the house itself had come alive, its walls closing in around me. I felt like I was being watched, scrutinized by something I couldn't see. By the time night fell, I was a bundle of nerves, jumping at every little noise. I decided to stay in the living room that night, hoping that the familiar surroundings and the comforting glow of the TV would keep the fear at bay. But as the hours ticked by, the anxiety only grew. The house was too quiet, the silence too heavy. It felt like the very air around me was pressing down, suffocating me with its weight. Then, just as I was starting to relax, I heard it again. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside my room. They were slow, deliberate, each step echoing through the quiet house. My heart began to race as I sat up, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped just outside my door, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but instead I heard a faint whisper. The voice was so soft it was almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, menacing, taunting, as if someone was speaking directly into my ear. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on me from all sides. I sat there, frozen in fear, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be out there. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the house remained silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on my nightstand. The fear kept me awake, my thoughts spiraling into paranoia as I imagined all the things that could be lurking in the darkness. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, I finally allowed myself to relax a little. The fear that had gripped me all night began to loosen its hold, but it didn't disappear completely. It was still there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. I went through the motions of normal life, but the fear never really left. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere I went, a constant reminder that something was out there, waiting. Every night the fear returned, stronger than before. I heard whispers in the silence, saw fleeting shadows in the corner of my eye, and felt a constant sense of being watched. The fear wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was real, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. What would you do if you were in a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know if you've ever had a similar experience. A week had passed since that first night, and the fear had only grown stronger. It was as if the house itself had been infected by some unseen force, its walls filled with a malevolent presence that I couldn't escape. I found myself avoiding certain parts of the house, especially the hallway where I had heard the footsteps and whispers. But no matter where I went, the feeling of being watched followed me, like a shadow that I couldn't shake. The nights were the worst. Every sound, every flicker of light sent a jolt of fear through me. The shadows seemed to move on their own, creeping closer and closer as the night wore on. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that there was nothing to be afraid of, but the fear was too real, too overwhelming to ignore. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I made the mistake of going back to the sunroom. The light outside was fading fast, casting long shadows across the yard. The room was filled with an eerie half-light that made the familiar surroundings seem strange and menacing. I tried to convince myself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that it was all just my imagination, but the fear gnawed at me, refusing to let go. As I stood there, staring out at the pond, I saw it, a figure standing at the water's edge. It was barely visible in the dim light, but I knew it was there. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that this was no ordinary shadow. The figure was tall, unnervingly still, as if it was part of the darkness itself. The longer I stared, the more distinct it became, a silhouette that seemed to absorb the dim light around it, growing sharper and more defined with each passing second. Its presence was overwhelming, a tangible force that made the air feel thick and heavy. I wanted to move, to run back into the safety of the house, but my legs felt like they were rooted to the floor. I was paralyzed by a fear so intense that it seemed to freeze my very blood. My eyes were locked on the figure, unable to look away, as if some unseen force was compelling me to keep watching. The figure didn't move, but the pond's surface began to ripple, as though something was disturbing the water. The ripples spread out in concentric circles, reaching the shore with a soft, eerie lapping sound that only added to the tension. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, and my heart pounded so hard in my chest that it was painful. Finally, as if released from a spell, I managed to tear my gaze away from the figure and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. I fumbled for the light switch, desperate to flood the room with light, to banish the darkness that seemed to be closing in around me. But when the lights came on, the figure was gone, leaving me alone in the empty room with nothing but my racing heart and the echoes of my own terror. I stood there for several long moments, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. My rational mind fought to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, but the fear that had gripped me was too real to ignore. Whatever that figure was, it wasn't a hallucination. It was something real, something malevolent, and it had been watching me. I turned and ran from the sunroom, slamming the door behind me as if that could keep the fear at bay. I locked every door and window in the house, my hands shaking so badly that it was difficult to work the locks. But even as I secured the house, I knew it was futile. Whatever was out there, it didn't need doors or windows to get in. It was already inside, and it was only a matter of time before it made its presence known again. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom, determined not to leave until morning. I huddled under the blankets like a child, every creak and groan of the house making me jump. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that the figure couldn't reach me here, but the fear was overwhelming. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with a suffocating tension that made it hard to breathe. In the silence of the night, I heard it again, the faint whispering, the soft footsteps outside my door. They were slow, deliberate, as if the figure was taking its time, savoring the fear that radiated from me. I pulled the blankets tighter around myself, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The fear was too strong, too real. I lay there, frozen with terror, as the footsteps grew louder, closer. They stopped just outside my door, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the doorknob rattled slightly, as if something was trying to turn it. My heart nearly stopped as I watched the knob, praying that it wouldn't turn all the way, that the lock would hold. But the pressure continued, a steady, relentless force that sent waves of panic through me. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the pressure on the doorknob stopped. The footsteps retreated, growing fainter as they moved away from the door, down the hallway, and out of earshot. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, pressing in on me from all sides. I stayed there, huddled under the blankets, too afraid to move or even breathe. Morning finally came, bringing with it a weak sense of relief. The light of day chased away some of the fear, but it didn't banish it completely. I knew that whatever had been outside my door wasn't gone. It was just waiting, biding its time. The house, once a place of comfort and safety, had become a prison, its walls filled with shadows and secrets that I couldn't escape. The fear followed me throughout the day, a constant presence that I couldn't shake. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat, every sound a warning. I couldn't bring myself to go near the sunroom, the memory of the figure by the pond still fresh in my mind. But no matter how hard I tried to avoid it, The sense of being watched never left me. That evening, as the sun began to set, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The fear was too much, too overwhelming to bear. I packed a bag with shaking hands, not caring where I went as long as it was far away from there. I left the house without looking back, the feeling of unseen eyes following me all the way to my car. I never returned to that house. My parents eventually sold it, and it stands empty now, a beautiful, secluded property by a tranquil pond. But I know the truth. There is nothing tranquil about that place. It harbors something dark, something malevolent that waits in the shadows, watching, waiting for its next victim. Even now, years later, the memory of that figure haunts me. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, I think I can hear it. The soft tapping on the glass, the faint whispering in the dark, the footsteps that follow me wherever I go. I know it's still out there, waiting for me to return, waiting to finish what it started. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe to Nightmare Narratives and hit the notification bell so you never miss another terrifying tale.